Imagine the scene. A crowded airport gate, the air thick with anticipation. A 17-year-old boy, full of dreams, is about to board a flight to his future. But in a flash, his excitement turns to terror. Cold, hard metal snaps around his wrists. He's publicly shamed, accused, and treated like a criminal by a gate agent with ice in her veins. He pleads his innocence, but no one listens. They see a black teenager and assume the worst. But what happens when the powerless boy they're dragging away is revealed to be the son of the one man who can bring their entire world crashing down? What happens when karma isn't just a concept, but a tidal wave of destruction? You are about to witness a story of injustice, a shocking twist of fate, and the most brutal, hard-hitting karma you have ever seen. The air in Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport thrummed with a unique kind of energy. A symphony of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and 1,000 overlapping conversations in a dozen languages. It was a place of hellos and goodbyes, of new beginnings and poignant ends. For 17-year-old Jamal Harris, it was the threshold of a dream. He stood near the massive window overlooking the tarmac at Concourse E, his lanky frame silhouetted against the setting sun. Below, the ground crew, looking like ants in their high-visibility vests, swarmed around a colossal Boeing 777. Jamal watched, mesmerized, his reflection in the glass showing a face alight with an almost sacred reverence. He wasn't just another passenger. He was a pilgrim at the Temple of Aviation. His fingers traced the outline of the plane's winglet, a perfect, elegant curve designed for maximum efficiency. He could almost feel the physics of it, the complex dance of lift and drag that would soon carry him thousands of feet into the air. He was on his way to a prestigious 6-week summer program at MIT, a pre-college deep dive into aerospace engineering that he had earned with a stellar academic record and a passion that burned as brightly as the jet engines he so admired. Flight 724 to Boston will be boarding shortly, a disembodied voice announced from the ceiling, and Jamal's heart gave a little flutter. Boston. The name itself felt like a promise. He clutched his boarding pass, the crisp paper a tangible ticket to his future. It was a first-class ticket, a perk he usually shied away from, but that his father had insisted upon. "For a journey this important, you travel in style, son," David Harris had said, his voice warm with pride. Jamal smiled at the memory. His dad was his hero, a man who had built his airline, Ascend Air, from a single leased plane into one of the most respected carriers in the industry. But to Jamal, he was just dad, the man who had built him countless model airplanes, who had taken him to air shows since he could walk, and who had taught him that the only ceiling on his dreams was the one he built himself. He adjusted the strap of his worn leather backpack, a gift from his late mother. Inside, nestled between a calculus textbook and a collection of sci-fi novels, was his most prized possession, a vintage leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with his own aircraft designs, intricate sketches of fuselages and propulsion systems, and notes on everything from laminar flow to the tensile strength of composite materials. He felt a buzz in his pocket and pulled out his phone. A text from his dad. "Runway's clear for takeoff, champ. Make me proud, love you." Jamal typed back, "Thanks, Dad. Couldn't have done it without my chief flight instructor. Love you too." He felt a pang of longing for his father's presence, but also a surge of fierce independence. This was his journey, his adventure. He was stepping out from under the shadow of his father's wings, ready to fly on his own. He made his way towards Gate E14, the crowd thickening as boarding time approached. He was a study in contrasts, a young man on the cusp of adulthood, dressed in comfortable joggers and a simple hoodie from his high school's robotics club, yet holding a first-class ticket on an airline his own father owned. He was blissfully unaware of the dissonance this might create in the eyes of a stranger, for he had been raised to believe that character, not class or color, defined a man. He saw the gate agent, a woman with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Karen, speaking curtly to a family struggling with their carry-on luggage. There was a tightness around her mouth, a flicker of impatience in her eyes that made Jamal feel an instinctive need to be polite, to make her job easier. He was just another face in the crowd to her, another passenger to be processed. And that was fine by him. Today he wasn't the CEO's son. He was just Jamal, the kid who loved planes, on his way to build them. He found a seat near the boarding lane, put in his earbuds and turned up the volume on a podcast about the development of the SR-71 Blackbird. The world outside his headphones faded into a dull roar. He closed his eyes, the voice of the narrator painting pictures of titanium hulls and record-breaking speeds. He was in his element, a bubble of serene, nerdy happiness. He was safe. He was excited. He was completely, devastatingly unprepared for the storm that was about to break. The symphony of the airport was about to be silenced by the shriek of a single discordant note of pure, unadulterated malice. And it was aimed directly at him. The boarding call for first-class passengers sliced through the ambient noise of the gate area. Jamal, pulled from his reverie about hypersonic flight, blinked and stood up, a smile touching his lips. It was time. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and joined the short line, his boarding pass and ID held ready in his hand. The gate agent, Karen, was now stationed at the podium, her face a mask of bored authority. She scanned the passport of the man in front of Jamal with a flick of her wrist, her movements sharp and economical. Then it was Jamal's turn. "Good evening," he said, offering her a polite, friendly smile as he handed over his documents. Karen's eyes, the color of washed-out denim, flickered from his face to the first-class boarding pass, and then back to his face. A tiny, almost imperceptible frown line appeared between her eyebrows. She took the ticket, her fingers brushing his with a coldness that had nothing to do with the airport's air conditioning. She stared at the name on the ticket, Jamal Harris. Then she looked at his driver's license, then back at him. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The passengers behind him began to shift impatiently. "Is there a problem?" Jamal asked, his smile faltering slightly. Karen didn't answer. Instead, she tapped a few keys on her computer, her eyes darting across the screen. Her lips thinned into a razor-straight line. She looked at him again, a new expression dawning on her face, a look of triumphant suspicion. "This boarding pass is for first class," she stated, her voice flat and accusatory. "Yes, I know," Jamal said, confused. "That's what I booked." "You booked?" she scoffed, a little louder this time, drawing the attention of those nearby. "A first-class ticket to Boston? That's a very expensive flight." Jamal felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. He didn't understand where this was going. Yes, it is. I'm heading to a summer program." "A summer program?" she repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief. She picked up the phone at her station, her eyes never leaving Jamal's face, as if he might bolt at any second. She held the receiver to her ear, still holding his ID and boarding pass hostage. "Yeah, I've got a situation down here at E14, she said into the phone, her voice now carrying a note of self-importance. "I have a passenger here, young black male, with a first-class ticket that seems fraudulent." The words hit Jamal like a physical blow. Fraudulent, young black male. The world around him seemed to warp and slow down. The curious glances from other passengers felt like tiny needles on his skin. He could feel their judgment, their suspicion, seeded by this woman's baseless accusation. "Ma'am, that's my ticket," Jamal said, his voice trembling slightly, a mixture of anger and humiliation rising in his throat. "My father bought it for me. You can check the credit card details. Harris, David Harris." Karen let out a short, ugly laugh. "David Harris? You think I'm going to fall for that? I've been working for Ascendair for 15 years. I know who the executives are, and their sons don't look like you." The implication was clear, a venomous dart aimed at his very identity. "You don't belong here. You don't fit. You are an imposter." Before Jamal could process the insult, 2 airport police officers arrived, their expressions grim, their presence immediately escalating the situation from a misunderstanding to a criminal investigation. "This is him," Karen said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Jamal. I suspect the ticket was purchased with a stolen credit card. He's getting agitated. I'm not agitated. I'm being falsely accused, Jamal protested, his voice rising in desperation. He looked at the officers, hoping to see a glimmer of reason in their eyes. Please just call the number associated with the booking. It's my father's number. He can clear this all up. Son, I need you to calm down, the older of the two officers said, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. His tone was patronizing, dismissive. He'd already made up his mind. He was seeing what Karen had told him to see, not a scared teenager, but a potential threat. I have a right to be upset, Jamal insisted, his heart hammering against his ribs. She's accusing me of a crime based on nothing, because of how I look. That's enough, the second officer said, stepping forward. Put your hands behind your back. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Jamal. What? No, I haven't done anything wrong. He took an involuntary step back, a purely instinctual reaction of fear and disbelief. That was all the justification they needed. In a swift, brutal movement, they grabbed him. One officer wrenched his arms behind him while the other pushed him forward against the gate agent's podium, sending a stack of leaflets scattering to the floor. Jamal's cheek scraped against the hard laminate countertop. The metallic click of the handcuff snapping shut echoed through the now silent gate area. Every eye was on him. He saw it all in a horrifying panorama, the smirking triumph on Karen's face, the pity in some passengers' eyes, the fear in others, the cold indifference in most. He saw a mother pulling her child closer, shielding her from the danger. Tears of pure, unadulterated humiliation stung his eyes, blurring the scene into a kaleidoscope of pain. He was 17 years old. He was an honor student. He was on his way to MIT, and he was being treated like a hardened criminal in front of 100 strangers, all because a woman with a chip on her shoulder and poison in her heart couldn't fathom the idea of a young black man flying first class. You're making a huge mistake, he choked out, the words tasting of metal and despair. Karen leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for him. The only mistake here was you thinking you could get away with it. Have a nice flight to central booking. She turned away, a smug smile playing on her lips, ready to continue boarding the flight, her small act of prejudice having been validated by the force of law. She had won. But she had no idea that the call she had refused to make was about to be made for her. And the man on the other end of the line wasn't just any concerned father. He was the king of this castle, and she had just tried to imprison his heir. The descent had been swift and brutal for Jamal, but for Karen, the fall from grace was about to be infinitely longer and infinitely harder. The sterile quiet of the gate area was heavy with the aftermath of the confrontation. Jamal stood in a state of shock, the cold bite of the handcuffs a constant, humiliating reminder of his powerlessness. The officers were speaking in low tones, discussing transport, their words a meaningless drone in his ears. His mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and a searing, helpless anger. He was missing his flight. He was missing the first day of his program. His dream was turning into a nightmare, broadcast live for an audience of strangers. Karen, meanwhile, had regained her composure with remarkable speed. She smoothed down her uniform, a self-satisfied smirk still lingering on her face, and addressed the remaining first-class passengers. My apologies for the delay, ladies and gentlemen. Just a small security matter to attend to. We'll resume boarding momentarily. She was basking in the glow of her perceived victory, a small-time tyrant who had successfully asserted her authority. She felt a rush of power, a validation of her bitter worldview. The world in her eyes had been set right. It was then that a new figure appeared, striding down the concourse with a purpose that parted the crowds like a ship's bow through water. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of quiet, effortless power. His face was a mask of controlled calm, but his eyes, dark and piercing, swept the scene at Gate E14 with an intensity that seemed to suck the air out of the room. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply walked, and with every step the dynamics of the situation began to shift. A few gate agents from neighboring gates recognized him first, their eyes widening, their posture straightening. The man walked directly to the two police officers holding Jamal. "I am David Harris," he said, his voice not loud, but carrying an unmistakable weight of command. "I believe you are holding my son." The officers, who had been treating Jamal with dismissive authority, now seemed to shrink. They exchanged a nervous glance. The older officer, the one who had patronized Jamal, stammered, "Sir, there was a report of a fraudulent ticket." David Harris's gaze was unwavering. "A report from whom?" All eyes, including David's, swiveled to Karen. She had been in the middle of scanning another passenger's ticket. At the sound of the name David Harris, she froze, the boarding pass slipping from her numb fingers. She turned, her face draining of all color, her confident smirk melting away to be replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The man from the pictures in the corporate newsletters, the man whose signature was on her paychecks, the founder and CEO of Ascend Air, was standing 10 feet away, and he was looking at her. "You," David said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, glacial tone. "You are the one who reported this fraud?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. No sound came out. Her carefully constructed world of petty authority was crumbling around her. The 15 years of service, the promotions she felt she deserved, the simmering resentment. It all culminated in this single, catastrophic moment of reckoning. David Harris turned his attention back to the officers. "I am the CEO of this airline. That ticket was purchased with my personal American Express Centurion card. The name on the card is David Harris. The name on the ticket is Jamal Harris. He is my son. Now I suggest you take those handcuffs off him, immediately." The officers, realizing the monumental scale of their blunder, fumbled for their keys. The clicks of the handcuffs being unlocked were deafening in the silence. The moment the cuffs fell away, Jamal stumbled forward and David was there to catch him, pulling his son into a fierce, protective embrace. He held him tight, one hand on the back of Jamal's head, whispering words of comfort only he could hear. For the first time since the ordeal began, Jamal let the tears fall freely, silent sobs of relief and residual terror shaking his body. He was safe. His father was here. Over his son's shoulder, David Harris's eyes found Karen again. The calm facade was gone, replaced by a look of cold, unyielding fury. It was the look of a man who had built an empire on principles of respect and service, only to find a viper nesting in its heart. It was the look of a father whose child had been hurt. "Don't go anywhere," he said to Karen, his voice a low promise of retribution. "You and I are going to have a conversation. And then we are going to have another conversation with your superiors. And then, I assure you, you will have a great deal of time to contemplate your actions." The other passengers who had been watching this drama unfold with rapt attention were now whispering amongst themselves, their phones secretly recording the incredible scene. The story was no longer about a potential criminal. It was about a gross abuse of power and a shocking, dramatic reversal of fortune. David Harris led his son away from the gate, his arm firmly around his shoulders. "Let's get you out of here, son," he said softly. "We'll get you on the next flight. Or we'll take the company jet, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're okay." As they walked away, Jamal glanced back. He saw Karen, standing alone and exposed in the middle of the concourse, her face ashen, her body trembling. The two police officers were avoiding her gaze, already trying to distance themselves from the disaster. The power she had wielded so cruelly just minutes before had vanished, leaving her utterly, hopelessly alone. The king had arrived and the jester's reign was over. The immediate consequences were just beginning, but the seeds of a much harder, more devastating karma had already been sown. The sterile, quiet confines of the airport's VIP lounge felt like another world compared to the raw, public humiliation at Gate E14. Jamal sat on a plush leather sofa, a bottle of water untouched on the table before him. The tremors in his hands had subsided, but a deep, resonant ache remained in his chest. It was the ache of being seen not as a person, but as a stereotype, of being judged and condemned before he'd spoken a word. David Harris sat beside him, not crowding him, but providing a solid, comforting presence. He had already made a few quiet, decisive phone calls. The first was to the head of his security department. The second was to the airport's chief of police. The third was to the dean of the MIT summer program, explaining that Jamal would be arriving a day late due to an unfortunate incident at the airport. In each call, his voice was calm, measured but laced with an unmistakable undercurrent of steel. Now he turned his full attention to his son. "Jamal," he began, his voice soft. "Look at me." Jamal lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed. "What happened back there? That was not your fault," David said, his gaze firm and unwavering. "I want you to hear me, and I want you to believe me. The ugliness you experienced came from her, not from you. Do you understand?" Jamal nodded, swallowing hard. She looked at me like I was nothing, like I was dirt on her shoe." "I know," David said. And for the first time, Jamal saw a crack in his father's composure, a flicker of raw, paternal pain. "People like her. They carry a poison inside them, and they try to spill it on everyone else, but you can't let it stain you. It's her poison, not yours." He leaned forward. "I built Ascend on a simple principle. Everyone deserves to travel with dignity, from the person in the last seat of economy to the person in 1A. That woman didn't just disrespect you, she disrespected everything I've worked to build." A knock on the door interrupted them. A woman in a sharp Ascend corporate suit entered. It was Eleanor Vance, the airline's vice president of operations, a woman known for her formidable efficiency. Her face was grim. "David," she said, her tone all business. "We've secured all the surveillance footage from the gate, multiple angles. The audio is crystal clear. We also have statements from 2 other gate agents who witnessed the initial interaction. And we have this." She placed a tablet on the table. It showed a social media feed, already buzzing with posts from Gate E14. A passenger had uploaded a video, shaky but damning. It started with Karen's accusatory sneer and ended with the arrival of David Harris. The title was explosive. "Ascend racially profiles teen, handcuffs him, turns out he's the CEO's son." The video had tens of thousands of views already. It was multiplying, spreading like wildfire across the internet. David watched the video, his expression hardening with every frame. He saw his son's confusion turn to fear, his polite smile crumble into desperation. He heard Karen's condescending, venomous words. He saw her smug satisfaction as the cuffs were snapped on. "Where is she now?" David asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Karen Miller. She's in a security office with HR," Eleanor replied. "She's been placed on immediate unpaid administrative leave pending a full investigation, as per protocol." "This isn't a protocol situation, Eleanor," David said, standing up and pacing the room. "This is a 5-alarm fire. I want a full review of her employment record, every commendation, every complaint. I want to know if she's ever been flagged for this kind of behavior before." "We're already on it," Eleanor assured him. "Initial findings are not good. There have been 3 prior passenger complaints against her in the last 2 years for rude and unprofessional conduct. 2 of them involved minority passengers. They were handled at the supervisory level. A written warning, a mandatory retraining module she completed online. Nothing more." David stopped pacing, his fists clenched at his sides. "So this poison has been leaking for years, and we just kept mopping it up and pretending the container wasn't cracked. This isn't just about one employee, Eleanor. This is a systemic failure. We failed." He looked at Jamal, his expression a mixture of fury and regret. "We failed him." He turned back to Eleanor. "The investigation needs to be swift and transparent, and the consequences need to be severe. I'm not talking about a quiet termination. I'm talking about a message being sent to every single employee of this airline. This will not be tolerated." His phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered it, putting it on speaker. "This is David Harris." "Mr. Harris, this is Sergeant Miller from the airport police." A nervous voice crackled through the speaker. "I wanted to personally apologize for my officer's conduct earlier." David cut him off. "Your apology is noted, Sergeant, but it's not me you should be apologizing to. Your officers, under the sole direction of my employee, detained a minor without cause, humiliated him publicly, and failed to perform even the most basic due diligence. They didn't just make a mistake. They participated in an act of blatant discrimination. I expect a full written report on my desk by morning detailing the disciplinary actions you will be taking." He hung up without waiting for a reply. The immediate fallout was swift. Karen was suspended, the police were scrambling, and a corporate crisis was exploding online. But this was just the beginning. David Harris wasn't just going to fire Karen Miller. He was going to make an example of her. He was going to pull on the thread of this one incident and unravel the entire tapestry of complacency that had allowed it to happen. For Karen, losing her job was about to become the least of her worries. The karma that was coming for her wasn't just a storm. It was a Category 5 hurricane, and she was standing right at ground zero. For Karen Miller, the hours after the incident were a blur of cold sweat and rising panic. The HR meeting was a sterile, impersonal affair. They used words like unprecedented, gross misconduct, and violation of core principles. They took her ID badge and escorted her from the premises like a common thief. As she walked through the employee parking lot, the place where she had complained about her commute for 15 years, she felt like a ghost. Her phone was a constant, buzzing torment, a flood of notifications from friends and family who had seen the video. The story was no longer just a viral clip. It was being picked up by major news outlets. Her face, twisted in that smug, ugly sneer, was everywhere. She got home to her small, meticulously clean suburban house and found her husband, Mark, watching the news, his face pale. On the screen, a legal analyst was discussing the potential for a massive lawsuit against Ascend Air. And then they showed her picture again. "They're making me out to be a monster," Karen whispered, sinking onto the sofa. "Well, what did you do, Karen?" Mark asked, his voice strained. He was a quiet man, a high school history teacher who had always been intimidated by his wife's aggressive certainty. "They're saying you handcuffed a kid." "I didn't handcuff him. The police did. I was just following procedure. He looked suspicious," she insisted, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. She had been so sure, so righteous in the moment. Now, replayed on a national stage, her actions looked exactly like what they were: petty, prejudiced, and cruel. The next morning, the first real hammer blow fell. An official termination letter arrived by courier, but it was the second paragraph that made her blood run cold. Ascend Air's legal department informed her that due to the extraordinary nature of her misconduct and the significant damage to the company's reputation, they were exploring legal avenues to hold her financially liable for a portion of the damages. They were, in essence, preparing to sue her. The public shaming was relentless. Her name and address were leaked online by internet sleuths. Cars began to drive slowly past her house. A pizza she hadn't ordered arrived, then another and another. Her social media was a cesspool of hate. People found her husband's school website and began emailing the principal, demanding the school district comment on being associated with her. Mark was called into the principal's office and told it might be best if he took a few days off, until things blow over. But things didn't blow over. They escalated. The internal investigation at Ascend Air, driven by David Harris's cold fury, was brutally efficient. Eleanor Vance's team uncovered the 2 prior complaints that had been swept under the rug. They interviewed the supervisors who had given Karen a pass. Those supervisors were promptly fired. Then, they found something more. They found a pattern of Karen using her employee flight benefits to bump non-revenue passengers off flights, often prioritizing her friends and family over more senior employees. It was a small abuse of power, but it was part of a larger picture of entitlement. The real twist, the one that sealed Karen's fate, came from an unexpected source. A junior gate agent, A young man named Ben, who had witnessed the event, had been terrified to speak up at the time. Racked with guilt after seeing the video of Jamal's humiliation, he came forward to Eleanor Vance. "There's something else," he said, his voice trembling. "Karen, she made a call right after she first saw the kid, before she called the police." "Who did she call?" Eleanor asked, leaning forward. "I don't know. It was on her cell, but I heard what she said. She was laughing. She said, 'You won't believe this. One of them is trying to sit in first class. I'm about to teach this one a lesson.'" This was the smoking gun. It proved premeditation. It proved malice. It transformed the incident from a case of bad judgment to a deliberate act of targeted harassment. This piece of evidence was the final nail in Karen Miller's coffin. When Ascendair's lawyers presented it to her, along with the threat of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, her bravado finally shattered. The fight went out of her. The karma, however, was just getting started. It began to ripple outwards, devastating the life she had built. The stress took its toll on her marriage. The constant hounding, the financial fears, the shame. It was too much. Mark, a man who valued peace and quiet above all else, couldn't take it. He packed a bag one evening while she was crying in the shower. He left a note on the kitchen counter. "I can't live like this, Karen. I don't even know who you are anymore." Within a week, she had been fired, publicly shamed, threatened with financial ruin, and abandoned by her husband. But the universe wasn't done with her yet. The story had caught the attention of a national civil rights organization, who were now representing the Harris family. They weren't just seeking damages from the airline. They were pushing for the district attorney to press criminal charges against Karen for unlawful imprisonment and filing a false police report. The woman who had smugly told Jamal to have a nice flight to Central Booking was now facing the very real possibility of ending up there herself. She had lost her job, her reputation, and her husband. Now she was about to lose her freedom. The hard karma was hitting back, not with a single blow, but with a relentless, crushing series of waves, each one dragging her deeper into the abyss she had dug for Jamal, proving that the poison one spills eventually creates a flood that drowns the spiller. The news that the district attorney's office was pressing charges sent a shockwave through the media cycle, reigniting the story with a new, more serious fervor. Karen Miller was no longer just a Karen from a viral video. She was now a criminal defendant. Her charge was filing a false report with intent to deceive and defame, a serious misdemeanor that carried the potential for up to a year in jail and a hefty fine. For Karen, who had always seen herself as a pillar of suburban respectability, the indictment was the final, devastating blow. Her legal bills mounted, forcing her to sell the house she had once shared with her husband, the house where she had felt so secure in her judgments. She had to move into a cramped, depressing apartment complex by the highway, the constant roar of traffic a grim soundtrack to her new life. The few friends who hadn't already abandoned her now kept their distance, afraid of being tainted by her toxic notoriety. She was an island, isolated by the consequences of a single hateful decision. The day of her court appearance was a media circus. As she walked up the courthouse steps, a cheap scarf pulled over her head. She was met with a barrage of cameras and shouted questions. She saw a news report on a monitor inside the lobby. It featured an interview with David Harris. He wasn't gloating. His face was somber, his tone measured. "This was never about revenge," he said to the reporter. "This is about accountability. My son was fortunate. He had a father who could intervene. But my question, the question that keeps me up at night, is what happens to the young man who doesn't have a CEO for a father? Who speaks for him? This legal action is a message sent on behalf of every person who has ever been judged by the color of their skin, instead of the content of their character. At Ascendair, and hopefully beyond, we are making it clear. The era of silent tolerance for prejudice is over." His words were not for her, but they pierced her more than any insult could have. He had taken her ugly personal act of spite and transformed it into a catalyst for change. He was building something positive from the rubble of the life she had destroyed. In the courtroom, Karen avoided looking at Jamal and his father, who sat in the front row. She pleaded no contest, her voice a barely audible whisper. The judge, an older African-American woman with eyes that seemed to see right through to Karen's withered soul, was unsparing in her sentencing. "Miss Miller," the judge began, her voice ringing with authority, "you were in a position of trust. You held a small amount of power over people in a stressful environment, and you chose to weaponize that power against a child. You did not see a passenger, you saw a target. You sought not to serve, but to humiliate. The damage you inflicted was not just on young Mr. Harris, but on the very fabric of our society, which struggles every day to overcome the kind of casual, reflexive bigotry you displayed." The judge sentenced her to 30 days in county jail, 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service to be performed with a civil rights organization, and mandated enrollment in an intensive racial bias and anger management program. The gavel fell like an executioner's axe. 30 days. She, Karen Miller, was going to jail. Meanwhile, Jamal was healing. The trip to MIT had been a success. He had excelled, his passion for aerospace undiminished. In fact, the incident had forged a new resolve in him. He returned home not broken, but stronger, more aware of the world and his place in it. He and his father had long talks, not just about planes, but about responsibility, justice, and the power to effect change. Inspired, David Harris did more than just fire the employees involved. He created the Ascend Air Foundation for Equity in Travel, a multi-million-dollar initiative aimed at funding scholarships for underprivileged students in aviation, and launching a nationwide campaign to combat racial profiling in the service industry. The video of Jamal's ordeal became the centerpiece of their new, mandatory employee training program, a permanent institutional memory of what had happened at Gate E14. On the day Karen Miller reported to the county jail to begin her sentence, trading her blazer for a drab, ill-fitting jumpsuit, Jamal was in a hangar with his father, standing before a small, sleek private jet. "I had them repaint it," David said, a hand on his son's shoulder. On the tail of the jet, where the Ascend Air logo usually was, there was a new symbol, a single powerful wing sheltering a smaller one, and beneath it a new name for the aircraft was stenciled in bold, proud letters, the Jamal Harris. Jamal looked from the plane to his father, his eyes shining. The humiliation at the gate felt like a lifetime ago. The woman who had tried to ground him had, in the end, only given him a greater reason to soar. Karen served her 30 days. She emerged a different woman, not redeemed, but broken. She was unemployable, infamous, and utterly alone. The hard karma had not just been a single event, but a complete and total reversal of fortune. She had tried to knock a young man off the first rung of the ladder to his dreams, and in doing so had fallen from her own perch into a pit from which she would never recover. The circle was complete. The scales of justice, once so brutally tilted, had been balanced with a force that was both devastating and, ultimately, just. 4 years later. 4 years can be an eternity, or the blink of an eye, depending on which side of the looking glass you're on. For Jamal Harris, it was a time of explosive growth and boundless opportunity. For Karen Miller, it was a slow, grinding erosion of the soul. Jamal was now 21, a senior at MIT, his name already known in aerospace circles not because of his father, but because of his own brilliant, innovative designs in drone propulsion systems. The incident at Hartsfield-Jackson was no longer a raw wound but a formative scar, a story he rarely told, but whose lessons were woven into the fabric of his character. He was the president of the university's chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers, and a mentor for the Ascend Air Foundation, the very program born from his humiliation. He had taken the poison that was meant to fell him and synthesized it into an antidote for others. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that was the antithesis of arrogance. He had seen the ugly underside of assumption and prejudice, and it had instilled in him a profound empathy. He was his father's son, not just in his love for the skies, but in his understanding that true power wasn't about commanding others, but about uplifting them. For Karen Miller, the world had shrunk to the size of a cage. After her 30 days in jail, a terrifying, humbling experience that stripped her of her last vestiges of pride, she had emerged into a world that had no place for her. The name Karen Miller was a digital ghost, eternally linked to viral shame. Every job application was a dead end. The moment a background check was run, the door was politely but firmly closed. She now went by her maiden name, Catherine Nowak. She had lost the house, the husband, the career. She lived in a third-floor walk-up in a town 50 miles from Atlanta, a place where no one knew her face. Her life was a monotonous cycle of anonymity and quiet desperation. Her once severe blonde bob was now a mousy, shoulder-length brown, her face perpetually etched with a defensive weariness. She worked the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift at a stop-and-go gas station just off the interstate. It was a purgatory of fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee, and the low hum of the slushy machine. Her customers were truckers, late-night travelers, and lonely souls, none of whom cared about her past. They just wanted gas, cigarettes, and a moment's respite on their journey to somewhere else. She was invisible, and invisibility was the only comfort she had left. Her anger had long ago curdled into a permanent low-grade resentment. In the quiet hours before dawn, she wouldn't reflect on her actions with remorse, but with a bitter sense of victimhood. She blamed the kid for being in first class, his father for being powerful, the media for making her a villain. In her narrative, she was the one who had been wronged, her life unfairly destroyed over a simple mistake. The court-mandated therapy had been useless, her participation a sullen box-ticking exercise. She had learned nothing and forgotten nothing. One crisp autumn night, just after 2 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. A young man walked in. He was tall and athletic, dressed in an MIT sweatshirt and jeans, his face illuminated by the screen of his phone as he spoke into it. "Yeah, Dad, the presentation went great. No, I'll be fine. Just grabbing a coffee for the rest of the drive. I should be home by 4. Okay, love you too." He hung up and walked to the counter. It was Jamal Harris. He was driving down from a university conference in Charlotte to spend the weekend with his father. Karen froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The air in her lungs turned to ice. It was him, the boy, now a man. He was radiant, confident, successful, happy, everything she wasn't. He looked right at her, but there was no spark of recognition in his eyes. To him, she was just a tired, middle-aged woman working a graveyard shift, a ghost. "Just a large black coffee, please," he said, his voice polite and warm. Karen's hands trembled as she turned to the machine. Her mind was a screaming vortex. This is him. This is the man whose life I tried to ruin. And he doesn't even see me. This, she realized with a sickening clarity, was the final, most exquisite form of her punishment. It wasn't the jail time or the public shaming. It was this. It was being a nameless, faceless servant to the person she had judged as being unworthy to even sit in the same cabin as her. It was the complete and utter reversal of their positions, a karmic checkmate so absolute it stole her breath. She placed the coffee on the counter, her gaze fixed on the worn laminate. "That'll be $2.50, she mumbled, her voice hoarse. Jamal pulled out his wallet and handed her a $5 bill. "Keep the change," he said with an easy smile. He picked up the coffee, nodded, and walked out, the bell chiming his departure. He was gone. Karen stood there, leaning against the counter, the $5 bill clutched in her hand. A single hot tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek, followed by another and another. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage, of self-pity, of the crushing, suffocating weight of her own insignificance. She had tried to define him by a single prejudiced glance, and in the end, her entire existence had been reduced to a fleeting, meaningless transaction in his. She was a ghost haunting the ruins of her own life, while he was flying towards the sun. As Jamal merged back onto the interstate, sipping his coffee, he didn't give the gas station cashier a second thought. His mind was on his future, on his thesis, on the job offer from SpaceX, on the possibilities that stretched before him like an endless runway. An hour later, he was landing his father's private jet, the Jamal Harris, at a small executive airport outside Atlanta. As he taxied towards the hangar, he saw another Ascend Air corporate plane on the tarmac. A group of teenagers were disembarking, chattering excitedly. They were the newest class of scholarship recipients from the foundation, flown in for a weekend mentorship program. He saw a young black girl about 14 stop at the top of the stairs and look out at the airfield with wide, wondrous eyes, just as he once had. An Ascend Air pilot knelt down and pointed something out to her, and she broke into a huge, brilliant smile. Jamal watched the scene, and a deep, profound sense of peace settled over him. He understood then the full circle. The true counterweight to an act of hate isn't an equal and opposite punishment. It is the creation of a greater and more enduring good. Karen Miller's fall had been spectacular, a cautionary tale of karmic retribution. But his own ascent, and the ascent of the young girl now standing on the tarmac, was the real victory. It was a victory written not in headlines of shame, but in the quiet, steady creation of opportunities, in the opening of doors that others had tried to slam shut. The echo of the handcuffs had long since faded, replaced by the roar of jet engines and the promise of new horizons. The karma that had hit Karen Miller wasn't just a force of destruction that had ended her story. It was a force of creation that had allowed his and countless others to truly begin. He had been a victim. He had become a symbol. And now, he was simply Jamal, a young man with his eyes on the stars, forever grateful for the father who taught him not only how to fly, but how to navigate the turbulent and sometimes unjust atmosphere of the world below. And so, the story of Jamal Harris and Karen Miller comes to a close. It's a stark reminder that our actions, especially those born from prejudice and hate, have consequences that can ripple out in ways we can never imagine. Karen didn't just lose her job. She lost her life as she knew it, a victim of the very same judgment and cruelty she so casually inflicted on a young boy. This wasn't just about a CEO's son. It was about the fundamental right to be treated with dignity, a right that belongs to everyone, regardless of their background or the price of their ticket. What do you think? Was this karma deserved? Was it too harsh, or was it the perfect response to a deep-seated injustice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, if it made you think, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, so you never miss another story of injustice, shocking twists, and powerful karma. Thank you for watching. What if the person tearing up your future was just a gate agent, and your only hope was the one man who could fire her on the spot? Your own father. Imagine this. You're a 16-year-old girl, scholarship in hand, ready to chase your dreams in a foreign country. The only thing standing in your way is a woman with a badge and a bad attitude. When she rips your visa in two, she doesn't just destroy a piece of paper. She ignites a firestorm. But she has no idea who is watching, and that the CEO of the entire airline just walked on board. Stay tuned, because the karma in this story is served first class. The air in Terminal 7 of JFK International Airport hummed with a frantic electric energy. A symphony of rolling suitcases, last call announcements, and the low murmur of 100 different languages. For 16-year-old Nia Williams, it was the sound of her future beginning. Her fingers, slick with a nervous sweat, clutched the crisp edges of her passport, and the precious student visa nestled within its pages. This wasn't just a trip, it was a quantum leap. A full scholarship to the prestigious Slade School of Fine Art in London, an opportunity she had poured her heart, soul, and countless charcoal-stained nights into securing. Her portfolio, a collection of vibrant, life-affirming portraits that seemed to breathe on the canvas, was carefully stowed in her carry-on, ready to be unleashed on a new continent. Her father, James Williams, a man whose tailored suit seemed to repel the chaos around him, gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "Deep breath, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice a low, steady anchor in the swirling sea of humanity. "Everything is going to be perfect." Naya offered him a wobbly smile, the excitement bubbling in her chest so intensely it felt like anxiety. "I know, Dad. It's really happening." "It is," he confirmed, his eyes the same deep, thoughtful brown as hers, crinkling at the corners. "And you've earned every single second of it." They approached the boarding area for Phoenix Airways Flight 112. The line was long, a snaking queue of weary travelers, excited tourists, and stoic business people. Nia's heart did a little drum solo against her ribs. This was it, the final hurdle before London, before her new life. At the podium stood a woman whose name tag, pinned askew on her navy blue uniform, read Amelia. She had a severe, pulled-back blonde bun that looked painfully tight, and a mouth that seemed permanently set in a thin, disapproving line. She processed each passenger with a detached, almost robotic efficiency, her eyes scanning documents with a flicker of what Nia could only interpret as deep-seated suspicion. An air of miserable authority hung about her, a clear sign of someone who mistook their small power for true importance. When Nia and her father reached the front of the line, a wave of primal unease washed over Nia. Amelia's gaze lingered on her for a moment too long, a cold, dismissive scan that took in her beaded braids and her hopeful, anxious face. It was a look Nia had seen before, a silent questioning of her presence, her right to be in a certain space. "Passports and boarding passes," Amelia said, her voice sharp and clipped, devoid of any warmth. Nia handed hers over, her hand trembling slightly. Amelia took them without a word, her lacquered nails tapping an impatient rhythm on the counter. She scrutinized Nia's passport, then her visa, her brow furrowed in exaggerated concentration. She held the visa up to the harsh fluorescent light, angling it back and forth as if searching for a hidden flaw. "There's a problem," she announced, her voice loud enough to carry, causing the people directly behind them to shift uncomfortably. Nia's blood ran cold. "A problem? What kind of problem?" Amelia laid the visa down but kept a proprietary finger on it. "This doesn't look right. The font on the date of issue is slightly off. It's a common characteristic of the forgeries coming out of West Africa." Nia blinked, bewildered. "West Africa? I'm from New York. We got this directly from the British consulate downtown. I can assure you it is entirely legitimate." Nia's father interjected, his voice calm but firm, a stark contrast to the agent's abrasive tone. All of her documentation was processed through the proper official channels. Amelia's eyes flickered to him, a hint of a sneer playing on her lips. She sized up his expensive suit and confident demeanor, not as marks of authority, but as a challenge to her own. "And you are?" "I'm her father," he said, his tone unwavering. "Well, her father. I've seen a lot of forgeries in my time on this job," Amelia said, her voice dripping with insinuation as she looked from James back to Nia. "People go to desperate lengths, and this one has all the hallmarks." Nia's heart hammered against her ribs. This couldn't be happening. "Forged? That's impossible. We have the confirmation emails, the acceptance letter from the school, everything." "Anyone can print a piece of paper," Amelia retorted, her gaze fixed on Nia, a strange, triumphant glint in her eye. She seemed to be enjoying this, the power to hold a dream in the balance. She held the visa between her thumb and forefinger, a cruel smile touching her lips. "And I'm not about to let my airline be responsible for transporting an illegal immigrant with fraudulent credentials." The accusation, so vile and baseless, hung in the air. Before Nia or her father could protest further, in one swift, deliberate motion, Amelia tore the visa in two. The sound, a sharp guttural rip, echoed in the sudden, shocked silence that fell over the gate area. For a moment it felt as though the entire airport had gone quiet, the world holding its breath. Nia stared, dumbfounded, at the two pieces of her future fluttering in Amelia's hand. The intricate crest, her name, her photograph, her permission to dream, all severed. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging, blurring the scene into a cruel watercolor. "You can't do that," she whispered, her voice choked with disbelief and a profound sense of violation. Amelia's smile widened. It didn't reach her eyes. "I just did." She tossed the 2 pieces of the visa onto the counter like discarded trash. "As per regulations, I have to confiscate and report this document. You will not be boarding this flight." She then looked past them, her voice a shrill, dismissive command. "Next in line, please." But no one moved. The other passengers were staring, a mixture of shock, pity, and outrage on their faces. Nia's father, however, was no longer calm. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I suggest," he said, his voice dangerously low, each word carefully articulated, "you get your supervisor immediately." Amelia scoffed, crossing her arms. "I am the senior gate agent. I am the supervisor on duty." "Then you've just made a very serious career-ending mistake," he replied, his eyes like chips of ice. He pulled out his phone, his thumb moving with a swift, practiced efficiency that spoke of high-stakes communication. Nia, watching through a blur of tears, had no idea who he was calling. All she could see were the tattered remains of her dream lying on the cold, sterile countertop. The art school in London, the new life she had so eagerly anticipated, all of it felt like it was dissolving into thin air. In that moment, the bustling airport felt like the loneliest place on earth. The weight of the injustice, the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of it, was a physical blow, leaving her breathless and shaking. She had followed all the rules, done everything right, and in a matter of seconds, it had all been undone by a woman with a mean streak and a little bit of power. But what Nia didn't know, what Amelia couldn't possibly have imagined, was that the man standing next to her wasn't just a concerned father. He wasn't just calling a lawyer or a travel agent. He was a man who held the fate of the entire airline. Every plane, every employee, every gate agent in the palm of his hand. And the storm that was about to break was going to be far more devastating than a ruined piece of paper. The karma, as they say, was coming. And it was coming with a vengeance. Amelia watched James Williams with a smirk. She'd seen this 100 times. The indignant, self-important passenger threatening to call their very important lawyer or complain to corporate. It was all bluster. They'd make a scene, miss their flight, and she'd file her report. A neat little story about a suspected forgery and a non-compliant passenger. In her mind, she was the hero, the vigilant guardian of international borders, protecting the integrity of Phoenix Airways. "Go ahead," she said, her voice oozing condescension. "Call whoever you want. My report will state that I acted in accordance with security protocols regarding suspect documentation." James didn't even look at her. His gaze was fixed on his phone's screen as he spoke into it, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of command. "Rebecca, it's James. I'm at Gate C60 for BA 112. No, I'm not on my way to the lounge. I'm at the boarding podium. We have a situation here. A code red situation. I need you, David, and the head of JFK ground operations at this gate in 5 minutes. No excuses." There was a pause. Amelia could faintly hear a frantic, tinny voice on the other end. "Yes, right now," James continued, his voice dropping even lower, colder. "And Rebecca, have airport security meet you here. We have an employee who has just deliberately destroyed a passenger's legal travel visa. My passenger, my daughter." He snapped his phone shut. The finality of the sound seemed to hang in the air. The smirk on Amelia's face faltered. Code red, head of ground operations, airport security. That was excessive. A flicker of doubt, small but unnerving, pierced through her self-assuredness. Still, she held her ground, her posture rigid. She couldn't back down now. That would be an admission of wrongdoing. "Sir, making threats and causing a scene is not going to change the fact that this visa is a fake," she insisted, her voice a little higher than before. Nia was just trying to breathe. Her father's hand was on her back, a steady, warm presence that kept her from completely crumbling. She looked at the 2 pieces of paper on the counter, then at the hard, unyielding face of the woman who had torn them. A deep, burning sense of shame and anger churned within her. This woman had looked at her black skin and her braids, and seen not a young artist on the brink of her dreams, but a criminal. She had reduced her entire identity to a crude, racist caricature. The 5 minutes James had demanded felt like an eternity. The boarding process had completely stalled. The other passengers were whispering, their phones now discreetly pointed in their direction, recording the unfolding drama. A few gave Nia sympathetic looks, but no one dared to intervene. Then they arrived. Not one supervisor, but a small squadron of them. A woman in a sharp business suit, her face pale with anxiety. Rebecca, the airline's JFK station manager, was in the lead. Flanking her was a harried-looking man, David, the head of customer experience, and a uniformed Port Authority officer. They moved with a purpose that instantly changed the atmosphere at the gate. This was no longer a simple passenger dispute. "Mr. Williams," Rebecca said, her voice slightly breathless as she rushed forward. "What's happened? I came as soon as I got your call." Amelia's jaw went slack. "Mr. Williams?" Rebecca was looking at Nia's father with a deference, no, a fear that was utterly baffling. She looked from her boss to the man in the tailored suit, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening lurch. James gestured calmly towards the counter. "Rebecca, this is your senior gate agent, Amelia. She has just informed me and my daughter that her fully legitimate consulate-issued student visa is a forgery, and then, after I assured her it was authentic, she proceeded to tear it in half right in front of us." Rebecca's eyes widened in horror as she saw the 2 pieces of the visa lying on the counter. She turned to Amelia, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Amelia, is this true?" Amelia, now white as a sheet, stammered, I was following protocol. The document showed signs of tampering. The font, the font," James interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. "The font. So on the basis of your amateur graphology, you decided to unilaterally destroy a legal document and shatter my daughter's plans to start school in London tomorrow." He took a step closer to the podium. "Did you scan it? Did you run the document number through the system to verify its legitimacy with the Home Office database, as is standard procedure for any questionable document?" Amelia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She hadn't. She had relied on her gut feeling, a gut feeling shaped by years of unchecked prejudice. There wasn't time. The line was long. You had time to lecture us. You had time to make accusations. You had time to rip this paper," James said, his voice a low growl. "But you didn't have time to do your actual job." David, the customer experience manager, stepped forward, his hands held up placatingly. "Mr. Williams, I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable. We can rebook your daughter. We can rebook her?" James cut him off, his gaze withering. "She has an orientation at her new school in less than 24 hours. Her scholarship is contingent on her arrival and enrollment this week. Your agent didn't just cause an inconvenience, David. He almost cost my daughter her entire future." The use of their first names, the absolute authority with which he spoke, sent a fresh wave of panic through Amelia. She was no longer just dealing with an angry passenger. She was standing before a man who knew her bosses intimately. "Amelia," Rebecca said, her voice trembling with rage, "you are to step away from this podium immediately. Hand over your badge and your airport ID. You are suspended pending a full investigation." "Suspended," Amelia squeaked, the injustice of it all in her mind making her bold. "For doing my job? For protecting this airline from fraud?" She gestured wildly at Nia. "How do we know she isn't part of some trafficking ring? They use young girls, That's enough," James's voice boomed, silencing her instantly. The quiet fury was gone, replaced by a thunderous rage that made everyone, including the Port Authority officer, take an involuntary step back. The mask of the calm father had fallen away, and what stood there was something far more formidable. He turned his piercing gaze from the cowering Amelia to the ashen-faced Rebecca. "Rebecca, this isn't a simple suspension. This is a termination, effective immediately. I want her escorted from this airport, and I want a full audit of every complaint ever filed against her on my desk by the time I land in London. Is that understood?" Rebecca just nodded, unable to speak. Amelia looked on, completely bewildered. Who was this man to fire her? He was just a passenger. A rich, arrogant passenger, but a passenger nonetheless. "You can't fire me," Amelia shrieked, her voice cracking. "You don't have the authority." James finally turned his full attention back to her. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, a hint of his identity was revealed. "I don't," he asked, a chilling calm returning to his voice. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a slim black leather wallet. He didn't flash a badge or an ID. He simply handed a business card to the stunned Port Authority officer. The officer looked at it. His eyes widened. He looked back up at James, his posture straightening completely. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Amelia, desperate and confused, tried to see the card, but Nia's father turned his back to her, creating a protective barrier for his daughter, and spoke to the managers. "Get my daughter a new visa issued. Call the consulate. Tell them you're calling on my behalf. Get it printed here at the airport. I don't care what it takes. The plane does not leave without her on it." He then looked down at Nia, his expression softening instantly. "Come on, sweetheart, let's get you on board." As he gently guided Nia around the podium, past the stunned managers and the now silent Amelia, Nia finally caught a glimpse of the card the Port Authority officer was still holding. It was simple, elegant black with silver lettering. James Williams, Chief Executive Officer, Phoenix Airways. The world tilted on its axis. Her dad. Her quiet, supportive, sometimes nerdy dad who helped her with her homework and made terrible puns was the CEO of the entire airline. And Amelia, the woman who had tried to break her, had just picked a fight with the most powerful man in the company. The hard karma hadn't just arrived. It was a tidal wave, and Amelia was standing at ground zero. The name on the business card seemed to hang in the air, an invisible, shimmering bomb that had just detonated. Chief Executive Officer, Phoenix Airways. Amelia saw the look on the Port Authority officer's face, the sudden ramrod-straight posture, the flicker of awe and fear in his eyes. She saw her station manager, Rebecca, looking as if she was about to faint. The puzzle pieces didn't just click into place. They slammed together with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Mr. Williams. Not just any Mr. Williams. The Mr. Williams. The man whose face was on the cover of the annual report. The man whose signature was on the corporate-wide memos she usually deleted without reading. The man who had taken over the company 2 years ago with a promise of modernization and a culture of respect. Her mind replayed the last 10 minutes in a horrifying high-speed blur. Her sneer, her condescending tone, her baseless accusations. "And you are?" "Well, her father. I'm not about to let my airline be responsible." My airline. She had said my airline to the man who actually owned it. And then the worst of it, the crescendo of her arrogance, her attack on his daughter. How do we know she isn't part of some trafficking ring? A cold dread, so absolute and profound it felt like dying, washed over her. It started in her stomach and spread through her limbs, turning them to lead. The small, petty power she had wielded with such relish had been a child's toy sword against a nuclear arsenal. You can't," she stammered, the words catching in her throat, but the fight was gone. Her voice was a pathetic squeak. James Williams didn't even grant her a final glance. His focus was entirely on the mission. Fix this and protect his child. He was speaking to Rebecca in a low, rapid-fire tone, the voice of a CEO in crisis mode. "Get the ambassador on the phone. Use my direct line. His name is Sir Patrick Evans. Explain the situation. The destruction of a UK-issued visa by our staff constitutes a diplomatic incident. We need an emergency replacement authorization, electronically immediately." "David," he said, turning to the customer experience manager who flinched at the sound of his name. "Find the most senior flight attendant on this flight. I want them to personally escort my daughter to her seat in first class. She's not to be disturbed by anyone. Clear the seat next to her. Yes, Mr. Williams. Of course, Mr. Williams. They mumbled in unison, scrambling to obey, their phones already pressed to their ears. And Rebecca, James added, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. This audit of Amelia's record. I want to see every flight she's worked, every passenger complaint, no matter how minor. I want to know if this is a pattern. I suspect it is. If our system has been burying complaints of this nature, I will burn the entire system to the ground. Am I clear? Crystal, Mr. Williams, Rebecca whispered, her face ashen. The Port Authority officer, now acting as an impromptu bodyguard, stepped towards Amelia. Ma'am, you need to come with me now. Reality crashed down on Amelia. This was real. This was happening. No, please, she begged, her voice finally breaking. She looked past the officer at the back of James Williams's head. Mr. Williams, please, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I was stressed, the lines were long, I'm not a bad person. Her plea was met with stony silence. James was now crouched slightly, speaking softly to Nia, his broad back a solid wall between his daughter and the mess Amelia had created. Sweetheart, I am so sorry, he murmured, his voice thick with a pain that went beyond the current situation. I'm sorry you had to experience that. This is not what this company stands for. This is not what I stand for. Nia was still in shock, her mind struggling to reconcile the image of her dad, the man who wore faded college sweatshirts on weekends, with this commanding figure who had an entire airport terminal jumping to his orders. But seeing the raw pain in his eyes, the fury he held on her behalf broke through her daze. She wasn't just a passenger he was defending. She was his daughter he was protecting. She nodded, unable to form words, and squeezed his hand. The officer took Amelia's arm. Let's go, ma'am. Her desperation turned to a frantic, clawing anger. You can't do this, she shrieked as he began to lead her away from the podium, her kingdom of misery. I have a union. I have rights. This is discrimination. You're only doing this because he's rich. Her accusations, now hollow and pathetic, echoed through the silent gate area. The other passengers watched, their faces a mixture of pity and grim satisfaction. They had all been witnesses. They knew what had happened. They knew it wasn't about his wealth, it was about her cruelty. As she was escorted away, her final parting shot was aimed at Nia. You think you're so special because your daddy is the CEO? You're still just a... The Port Authority officer tugged her firmly, cutting off the vile words before they could be fully unleashed. Her voice faded down the jet bridge, a shrill, incoherent rant of self-pity and rage. The gate area felt strangely calm in the aftermath. The tension had broken, replaced by a stunned sort of reverence. David rushed back, his phone still in his hand. Sir, the consulate is on it. The ambassador's office is expediting. They're sending a digitally secured authorization directly to our system. We can print a temporary travel document right here that will be recognized on arrival. Good, James said, his posture relaxing slightly. He ran a hand over his face, the CEO mask momentarily slipping, revealing the exhausted father beneath. He looked at Nia. First class, sweetheart. You deserve a little peace and quiet after all this. A senior flight attendant, a kind-faced woman with warm eyes named Clara, appeared by their side. Mr. Williams, Miss Williams, it will be my absolute pleasure to escort you on board. We have your seats ready. She smiled gently at Nia. We're so terribly sorry for what you just endured. Please come with me. As Clara led Nia toward the plane's entrance, Nia looked back at her father. He was still standing there, watching the manager's work, his face set like granite. He had stopped a monster for her, but she could see the cost in the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He wasn't just a CEO cleaning up a corporate mess. He was a father who had just witnessed the world try to wound his child, and he was using every ounce of his power to burn the poison out. The karma had struck Amelia with the force of a thunderbolt, but for Nia and her father, the lightning strike had left a deep, resonant tremor in its wake. The inside of the Phoenix Airways Boeing 777 was a world away from the harsh, fluorescent-lit chaos of the terminal. The first-class cabin was an oasis of hushed tones, soft lighting, and understated luxury. Clara, the flight attendant, led Nia to a spacious private suite, complete with a plush leather seat that converted into a fully flat bed, a personal wardrobe, and a large entertainment screen. The seat next to hers was conspicuously empty. "Can I get you anything, Miss Williams?" Clara asked, her voice a soft, respectful murmur. "Some water, a glass of champagne, or perhaps you'd like me to bring you a hot chocolate?" The offer was so unexpectedly kind, so normal, that it nearly brought Nia to tears all over again. "Hot chocolate would be really nice," she managed to say. "Of course," Clara said with a warm smile. "Please make yourself comfortable. If you need anything at all, just press this button. Anything." Nia sank into the ridiculously comfortable seat, the supple leather cool against her skin. She was physically on the plane, in a seat more luxurious than her own bedroom, but her mind was still back at the gate, replaying the ugly scene. The rip of the paper, Amelia's sneering face, the venom in her voice, and then the sudden seismic shift when her father revealed who he was. Her dad, the CEO. It was a fact she'd always known, of course, but it had been an abstract concept, like knowing the earth is round. It didn't impact her daily life. He was just Dad, the man who grilled burgers in the backyard, who helped her with her art history essays, who fell asleep on the couch watching documentaries. She had never seen him as James Williams, the corporate titan. Seeing him unleash that power, that cold, controlled fury, was both terrifying and deeply, fiercely reassuring. He had wielded his power like a shield to protect her. Her father boarded a few minutes later, just before the cabin door was sealed. He slid into the seat across the aisle from her, his tie loosened, the formidable CEO aura replaced by a familiar paternal weariness. He met her eyes, and the question was clear in them. "Are you okay?" Nia just shook her head, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down her cheek. "I just don't understand how someone can be so hateful." James sighed, a deep, heavy sound. "Oh, sweetheart, I wish I could tell you it was rare. Power, even a tiny amount of it, can be a poison. For some people, it doesn't corrupt them. It just reveals who they always were. That woman, she saw you, a brilliant, talented young black woman about to take on the world, and her own bitterness and prejudice couldn't stand it. It had nothing to do with your visa, Nia. It had everything to do with you." The truth of his words settled in her heart, a painful, heavy stone. She thought I was a criminal. She chose to see a stereotype because it was easier than seeing a person, he said, his voice laced with anger. "And that is a failure of character. It's also a failure of my company. I've spent 2 years talking about culture, about respect, about looking after our passengers. To see it so grotesquely violated right in front of me, and to have it happen to you." He trailed off, shaking his head. The plane began its slow taxi to the runway. The flight attendants moved with their usual serene efficiency, but Nia noticed the discreet, deferential glances they sent in her father's direction. The news had clearly spread. "What's going to happen to her?" Nia asked quietly. "She's been fired," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Her access to any airport facility has been revoked, and that audit I ordered. If we find a pattern of this kind of behavior, we will turn the evidence over to the Port Authority and the Department of Justice. Destroying a visa is a federal offense. Her career in this industry is over. But that's not enough." Nia looked at him surprised. "What do you mean?" "Firing one toxic employee is like pulling a single weed," he explained, leaning forward. "You have to dig up the roots. This happened because our systems allowed it to happen. Our training wasn't good enough. Our complaint handling process was clearly flawed. I'm going to find out how many other Amelias we have, and I'm going to fix it. This can never happen to anyone on one of my planes again." Just then, An older gentleman from the seat behind Nia's father leaned into the aisle. He had a kind face and was holding a small glass of whiskey. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a gentle British accent. "I don't mean to intrude. My name is Arthur Ellington. I was in the queue behind you and I saw the whole thing. I just wanted to say to your daughter," he said, looking at Nia with sincere eyes. "That woman's behavior was appalling. A disgrace. And I wanted to say to you, sir," he nodded at James, "thank you. It's not often one gets to see justice served so swiftly and decisively." James looked taken aback. "Thank you, Mr. Ellington. I appreciate that." "We all do," Arthur said, gesturing vaguely to the other passengers in the cabin. "The whole gate was on your side. We could all see what was really happening. Now," he gave a small smile to Nia, "you go to London and you be brilliant. That's the best revenge of all." He retreated to his seat, leaving Nia with a warmth spreading through her chest that the hot chocolate hadn't provided. The man hadn't known who her father was. He had simply seen an injustice and was validating her experience. She wasn't just the CEO's daughter who got special treatment. She was a girl who had been wronged, and people had seen it. She looked at her father, who seemed genuinely moved by the stranger's words. In that moment, he wasn't a CEO or a corporate warrior. He was just a dad, sitting on a plane with his daughter, both of them a little battered, but on their way to her future. The plane finally lifted off the runway, soaring into the night sky, leaving the ugliness of the terminal far below. London was ahead. And for the first time since she'd stepped into that line, Nia felt the familiar, hopeful thrill of her adventure beginning anew. The landing at Heathrow was smooth, a gentle return to earth that belied the turbulence of their departure. For Nia, the 8-hour flight had been a cocoon. She'd slept, watched a movie, and sketched in her notebook, the simple act of creation a balm to her wounded spirit. Her father had worked for most of the flight, his suite transformed into an airborne office. He'd been on a series of quiet, intense video calls, his face grim. He wasn't just firing one person, he was waging a war. As promised, a representative from the airline's UK office met them at the jet bridge. He was a flustered, apologetic man who handed Nia a crisp new envelope. Inside was her official reprinted student visa and a letter from the British ambassador himself, offering his profound apologies for the incident and wishing her well in her studies. The machinery of power, once used against her, was now working at full tilt to make amends. In the days that followed, Nia threw herself into the whirlwind of starting college. She met her roommate, a bubbly, aspiring sculptor from Manchester. She explored the historic studios of the Slade School of Fine Art, her artistic heroes' ghosts seeming to linger in the turpentine-scented air. She fell in love with London, its sprawling parks, its chaotic, beautiful energy, its endless museums. The incident at JFK began to feel like a bad dream, a surreal prelude to the real story of her life. She spoke to her dad every night. He didn't talk much about the specifics of the investigation, shielding her from the ugliness of it, but she could hear the steel in his voice. The Amelia audit, as it was being grimly nicknamed within the company, was in full swing, and it was uncovering a rot far deeper than anyone had imagined. Amelia hadn't been an outlier. She was a symptom. The audit revealed dozens of complaints against her over her 12-year career, nearly all from passengers of color. They told similar stories, baseless accusations, rude and demeaning language, random extra security checks, and lost documentation. The complaints had all been filed, processed by a labyrinthine HR system, and ultimately dismissed by mid-level managers who saw her as a tough but effective employee, good at keeping the lines moving. No one had ever connected the dots or seen the clear pattern of racial bias. The investigation expanded. They found other agents with similar, though less egregious, records. They found that anti-bias training was a 20-minute online module that employees clicked through once a year. They found that the system for filing passenger complaints was so convoluted, it seemed designed to make people give up. James Williams did exactly what he promised Nia he would do. He burned the system to the ground, The head of JFK ground operations was fired. The station manager, Rebecca, was demoted and reassigned. 3 HR managers responsible for overseeing employee complaints were let go. He brought in a renowned diversity and inclusion consulting firm to completely overhaul their training, making it an intensive, in-person, ongoing process. He streamlined the complaint system, making it accessible with a single QR code scan from any boarding pass, and created an independent civilian review board to audit the outcomes. The karma that hit Amelia was not a single lightning strike. It was a slow, crushing avalanche of her own making. Her firing was upheld, her union appeals exhausted by the mountain of evidence against her. But it didn't stop there. James Williams's legal team, armed with the audit's findings, compiled a detailed report and handed it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They focused on 3 specific cases, including Nia's, where Amelia had confiscated or destroyed valid travel documents. She was charged with 3 counts of destruction of legal entry documents, a federal crime. The news broke in the press. BA gate agent fired by CEO father after tearing up daughter's visa faces federal charges. The story went viral. Amelia, isolated and unemployable, decided to fight back in the only way she could, the court of public opinion. She hired a cut-rate PR firm and went on a right-wing talk show, painting herself as the victim of a woke corporate elite and a powerful, vindictive billionaire. This was never about race, Amelia insisted, her face a mask of practiced sincerity for the camera. It was about security. I am a patriot who was punished for doing my job. This CEO used his immense power to crush a working-class woman to protect his privileged daughter, who probably got that scholarship through her father's connections anyway. She tried to make it a story of class warfare, of the powerful versus the powerless. For a few days, it gained some traction in the murky corners of the internet. People railed against cancel culture and the arrogant CEO. But then, the twist came. The other victims started speaking out. A Nigerian doctor, whose work visa Amelia had lost 5 years prior, causing him to miss a major medical conference where he was the keynote speaker, came forward. A Haitian family whose passports she had confiscated, forcing them to spend 2 days in airport detention until a lawyer intervened, told their story to a major newspaper. A black student from Atlanta, a young man who had also been accused of having a fake visa by Amelia just 1 year earlier and had been forced to abandon his study abroad trip, gave a heartbreaking television interview. One by one, the ghosts from Amelia's past, the people whose complaints had been buried, emerged into the light. Their stories, all bearing the same ugly hallmarks, corroborated Nia's experience and dismantled Amelia's narrative. She wasn't a patriot. She was a serial abuser of power. She wasn't a victim. She was a predator whose hunting ground had been an airport terminal. Her public relations campaign backfired spectacularly. The talk show host who had championed her was forced to issue a retraction. Her legal defense fund evaporated. The public saw the truth. This wasn't about one girl and her powerful father. It was about one woman and her long, unchecked history of hate. The karma was not just that she lost her job. It was that her character was laid bare for the entire world to see. She was left with nothing but the ugly truth of who she was, reflected back at her from a million screens. 6 months later, London was draped in the soft, gray light of late winter. Nia stood in a bright, airy gallery in the trendy Shoreditch district, a glass of sparkling cider in her hand, her heart thrumming with a joy so pure it felt like a physical warmth. All around her, on pristine white walls, hung her portraits. It wasn't the big end-of-year school exhibition. It was a special showcase of emerging young artists, and she had been one of 12 students chosen to participate. Her signature piece, the one the gallery had used for the promotional materials, was a large charcoal and pastel work titled Gate C60. It was a portrait of a young black girl. Her face was rendered in exquisite, soft detail, her eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and fierce hope. But across the portrait, where a visa and a passport might be, was a jagged, torn line, rendered in angry, dark slashes of charcoal. It was a piece about fragility and resilience, about a dream almost broken, but ultimately, defiantly, still whole. It was the first piece to sell. Her father stood beside her, his eyes not on the art, but on her face, glowing with pride. He'd flown in just for the opening. "You took something ugly," he said, his voice quiet amidst the gallery's cheerful buzz, "and you made it into something beautiful and powerful. That's your gift, Nia." "It's my therapy," she laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder for a moment. "But your therapy has been a bit more large-scale, Dad." He smiled wryly. "You could say that." His own form of therapy, the Nia Initiative, had become his obsession and was now sending ripples throughout the entire airline industry. It was a comprehensive, top-to-bottom overhaul of customer-facing policies and employee culture. The new anti-bias and de-escalation training was now a week-long immersive course for all new hires and a mandatory 3-day annual refresher for all current employees. It was run by leading sociologists and psychologists, not HR reps. The new complaint system was a model of transparency and efficiency. Every complaint was triaged and investigated by the independent review board he'd established, and the anonymized data, tracking complaints by location, employee, and passenger demographic, was published in a public quarterly report. Other airlines, initially skeptical, were now starting to study their model. The Amelia audit had become a catalyst for industry-wide change. As for Amelia, her story had reached its grim, inevitable conclusion. Faced with the testimony of multiple credible victims, she had accepted a plea bargain to avoid a lengthy trial. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, a hefty fine, and 500 hours of community service. She was legally barred from ever working in a capacity involving federal travel or security oversight again. She had faded into ignominious obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in airline break rooms. Later that evening, as Nia and her father were leaving the gallery, a young woman with a camera and a press pass from a student newspaper approached them hesitantly. "Miss Williams, I'm so sorry to bother you. I'm from the university paper. I loved your piece, Gate C60. Can I ask what the inspiration was?" Nia looked at her father, who gave a slight nod. The story was public record now, but she had never spoken about it herself. "It was inspired by a moment when someone tried to tell me where I belonged," Nia said, her voice clear and steady. "They tried to define my future based on their own prejudice. This piece is about refusing to accept that definition. It's about taking the broken pieces and making them a part of your story, but not letting them be the whole story." The student journalist was scribbling furiously. "And now there's the Nia Initiative at Phoenix Airways named after you. How does that feel?" This was the part that sometimes felt the strangest, the most surreal. "It feels hopeful," Nia said honestly. "It feels like what started as a really painful experience has been transformed into something that might protect other people. My dad did that. He took a problem that hurt his daughter and decided to fix it for everyone's daughter and son, for everyone." As they walked out into the cool London night, the city lights glittering around them, Nia felt a profound sense of peace. The hard karma that had hit Amelia wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration. It was about the world bending, however violently, back towards a semblance of justice. The final twist wasn't some dramatic confrontation. It was quieter, more profound. A few weeks later, Nia received an email. It was from the young man from Atlanta, the student who had also been targeted by Amelia and had his study abroad trip ruined. He had seen the article about her gallery show. "Dear Nia," it read, "I just wanted to say thank you. Not just because your family finally held that woman accountable, but because you spoke up. When it happened to me, I was so ashamed. I just went home and tried to forget. Your story and your art made me realize it was her shame, not mine. Because of the new policies at BA, they reached out to me. They refunded my original ticket and offered me a new open ticket to go anywhere in the world to study. I'm reapplying. I'm going to try again. You've inspired me to not let the Amelias of the world win. Thank you." Nia read the email twice, tears filling her eyes. This was the true karma. It wasn't just about one woman's downfall. It was about the rising of others. It was the ripple effect of one brave act, spreading outwards, restoring dreams that had been stolen, and in the process creating a legacy of hope. Her father hadn't just gotten justice for his daughter. He had created a pathway to justice for countless others, ensuring that the echoes of that one ugly moment would ultimately become a symphony of positive change. And so a single act of hateful prejudice became the catalyst for an industry-wide revolution. Nia's story isn't just about the dramatic takedown of a racist gate agent. It's about the incredible power of taking a stand. It shows us that true karma isn't just about punishment. It's about healing, restoration, and creating positive, lasting change that uplifts everyone. James Williams didn't just fire a problem employee. He rebuilt the entire system to ensure no one would have to endure what his daughter did. And Nia, through her art and her courage, turned her trauma into a beacon of hope for others. What did you think of Amelia's hard karma? Was it deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a like to help us share it with more people. Hit that share button. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true life dramas. Thank you for watching.